Hi, and welcome to Tony Time. Well, today on our show, we brought in Mike Reddy for Ward 7. We're going to talk about things in the city and a lot of questions I've been asked while I've been out, doing grocery shopping or anything like that. So, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, you're very welcome. Very welcome. So, you know what? I want to ask you about city budgets because I think people are confused.
Well, it's the big topic, and it's the one that everybody in the city is involved with because everybody pays. Whether you're a property owner or whether you're a tenant, you pay through your rent. So, and the thing that I wanted to do was just to highlight the fact that what it does, what it provides.
Yeah.
Because the taxes that we pay provide the services that we get. One of the things, you say you get stopped at the grocery store and things, and people do approach me the same place. Hannaford seems to be the biggest spot.
That is the big place.
For people to talk about it, but oftentimes people will talk about the increase in taxes. And one of the things we struggle with is to keep that at a level that everybody can afford. Mm-hmm. But I've never had anybody say to me, and also I want you to reduce that service. That's the disconnect. We're paying for all the services, for the fire, the police, the public works. I don't care about having the police department until I need them, and then I want them sitting outside my door,
Right.
before. And I think that's a normal reaction. It's the way that we think. We're involved in, or we're interested in what involves us, and sometimes we don't think that involves us. But this budget in the city is just, especially for a city like Biddeford, which the taxes in Maine are really governed by the value of the property.
Right.
And what the state has assessed us as property, what the state has assessed the city value as property. And because we're influenced by the water, it's huge. It's a huge, huge number.
So actually, the price comes in from the state.
In a good sense, yes. In a good part, yes.
Okay.
They have assessed what the value is, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But the one benefit we have is the property that we have that we were under what we call TIF is protected from that. So that's not included in the value of the state right now. But one of the things, and I'm sure you've heard it because you're at all the council meetings, that I talk about a lot, and I've been talking about for the last 20 years, is the way that the state not necessarily assesses our value, but the fact that all of the funding from the state is based on that value. School funding is a huge part of this, and I had some numbers, but Sanford is a community that really, population-wise, the type of population, the poverty rates, the demographics are very, very similar to Biddeford.
Okay.
The school population is very, very close. They have, I think, about 400 more kids than Biddeford, but the free and reduced lunch population is about the same. The poverty rate in Biddeford and Sanford is pretty close. And the thing that always interested me is the difference in what the Sanford receives for education funding. This past year, Sanford received over $26 million.
Oh my.
Biddeford received 12. $14 million can buy a lot of stuff in a community. And that's based on just property value. We had, when Mayor Nutting was here, which was 10, 12 years ago now, we had a meeting with the Commissioner of Education, he and I and the school department superintendent, and we were told, you have water, Sanford doesn't have water. So the fact that we have, property that's on the ocean is the driving factor.
Really?
Whether or not people that are living down there have lived there for 100 years and can't necessarily afford to pay that kind of tax. So it should be a factor in what we get for state funding. It shouldn't be the factor, because, you know, we're looking at costs in the school that really have nothing to do with our property value.
No.
We have an 18 to 20% level of special ed needs. Those are expensive, special ed kids. Sanford has a similar number. So again, when you look at the population of the schools, Sanford versus Biddeford, it's almost a mirror. It's almost a mirror. They do have about 400 more kids, but that's not the factor of doubling, more than doubling what we receive. I mean, I looked in the last 2 years, Sanford has received about $52 million more than what we've received from the state.
And that's because we're on the water.
Exactly. Exactly.
And you don't see that changing ever?
Well, the problem is you'd have to change the school funding formula for the whole state.
All right.
And when you look at the rest of the state, particularly in northern Maine, there are a lot of communities that get upwards of 70, 80% of their school funding paid for by the state. We're at 37. And some of those communities, they're very, very small communities, couldn't afford to pay much more. But and they say, well, that's where the political clout is. Those communities understand the pressures that they're under, and that's one of the things that keeps them together. But there needs to be some way to address it. It shouldn't be. I'm not expecting that we would take the funding formula and eliminate the property value. It still needs to be in there. It still needs to be a factor, but not the factor. And that's the difference. That's what I see as a real difference. It also drives what we get for state aid to the cities. You know, the property tax sharing. Now it has improved in the last couple of years. We've done much better with the state going back to contributing what they're supposed to contribute. But it's, again, a huge factor in that is what our property value is.
It's so, you know, this is a wonderful thing that you're explaining this to the people here because they don't understand that.
Yeah, well, and truthfully, I was on the school committee years ago, and that was one of the things that I really couldn't understand. We always try to compare our situation to somebody similar, or we look at it similar. And again, Sanford, the community is, the total population is very close. You know, it was a mill town like Biddeford was. And again, all of the demographics are very, very close. It just didn't make sense. Even in those days, Sanford was getting $8 to $10 million a year more than the city of Biddeford in school funding now, just in the school funding. It just didn't make any sense. Now, Sanford's got a new high school. They were able to get it paid for by the state. Now, they still contribute, I believe it's 10%. But when Mayor TONI was here, we ended up redoing the high school, and that was totally on the city's dime because the state wouldn't fund it. So, you know, we're paying that as part of our regular budget, where Sanford has picked up a significant, you know, 85 to 90% is paid for by the state. That's a big difference. We're talking about $60 million building.
Now, you mentioned something in this conversation. Would you explain, because I've had many people walk up to me, what is a TIF? If you could break it down for everybody.
And the best that I can. The TIF is tax increment financing. Excuse me, tax increment financing. What it does is allows a developer and the city to come to an agreement, and every property that's listed in the city of Biddeford is paying taxes. So if you buy a piece of property and you enter in a TIF agreement with the city, that value stays right there. Okay, so you're going to pay taxes. We're going to receive those taxes based on that. The TIF involves what the increase in that property value is. So you're putting in, presumably, you know, $10 million into that property to develop it. You need, particularly what we're seeing today is for financing purposes, to be able to recapture some of the increased tax money. Because of the $10 million you put in there, there's going to be an increased value in that property. Your taxes obviously would go up significantly from what they were. What it does is two things. One, it allows the city to shelter that $10 million in increased value, so it doesn't go on to the property value that affects our state funding for education and state sharing. And it also allows the developer to use those taxes to put back into the property. So, and there are significant differences in TIFs. Some of them involve credit enhancement, which is the one I've just explained, which would, the increase in the taxes would be shared between the city and the developer, and that would go to you for a certain period of time. The other one is, we have a TIF for, I don't know, it's close to 20 years now, I think, up at 111. That TIF, none of that goes to the developer. It is strictly a TIF for the city. So the city has sheltered that value, and also the money from the increase in taxes from when it was just a field to what it is now goes into the downtown TIF. That was always envisioned to be, and remember years ago Bob Dodge was the economic development director, and the plan was that was to build a garage downtown to help improve the economic development of the downtown. But so that TIF is completely different from some of the ones we're dealing with now, which are credit enhancements. We've worked with some of the mill owners. The Zanton property, who owns the mill at Saco Falls and the loft at Saco Falls, needed TIFs to be able to complete that development. Some of the other things that TIF allows the developers to do, a lot of them are working with Main State Housing. If you have a TIF, and the Main State Housing projects are really, it's almost like a lottery. You know, you have to apply for those. There are a lot of people applying for those projects, and they do it on a points system. So if you're able to get a TIF, which means that you've got some kind of an agreement with the community, then you get extra points for that, because Main State Housing is understanding that the community is invested in this property and that it will be a long-standing property. So they give them, I believe, 5 points on a project like that.
Okay.
So it helps them set it up. Now, I know the TIF thing is very, very difficult to understand, and I don't understand all of it, but Bob Dodge was the one that kind of schooled me years ago in really the difference between a TIF that we work with and help a developer and the regular TIF. The credit enhancement TIF is the one where a developer would gain some profit from that. The regular TIF, like the parking, like the TIF at 111, the city maintains all of those funds.
Okay.
The other part for us is really the sheltering. There is a significant amount of value in the TIF district in the downtown that isn't on the state property value roll.
Okay.
So that means that when that TIF does expire, and I think one of them is 11 or 12 years, there's going to be $100 million added to our property value, which will reduce the amount of profit sharing we get, which will reduce the amount of state aid to education. And when you consider that we get 37%, it's basically we're losing 63 cents on every dollar. So as long as we can maintain those TIFs, and there are strict regulations on managing TIFs, and the state, controls the approvals of those TIFs. So it's not like we're doing anything we shouldn't be doing, but to me, as long as you can shelter that, the better.
Yeah.
Because when those go away, we're going to see not an explosion, but we're going to see a big increase in what the city itself is to provide for education, because the state money will reduce. And that's, again, if you remember years ago, there was a referendum. The state had put out a referendum, should they provide 55% of education. Now, they've never done that. Even since then, I think the state is at a 44 or 45%. And we'll never get 55, and it wasn't intended that every city would get 55. It's like we talked about before. Some smaller communities may get 80, 85%. But the bigger the pie, the bigger the whole pie, the bigger our piece will be,
Exactly.
even at 37%. And school funding is one, the school department is one of the biggest single pieces of the budget.
You know, as I sit at City Hall and videotape, and I've learned an awful lot. I have learned a lot. And tell me if I'm wrong, I feel that everybody is planning for like the future. All right? You know, if we do this 10 years down the road, it's not instant gratification. It is planning for the future. Am I wrong?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely true. And I think probably in the last 10 years, that's been the focus of all the mayors and all the city councilors and all the school committee people that have been up there. You're right. Because we used to look at a budget as a year-to-year thing. And now, and the superintendent that we have now is really, really very good at that and has highlighted that every year that he's come to the city council. He's looking at 2 to 3 years ahead and what this increase will mean to that next 2 or 3 budgets. The other thing we've talked about a lot, and you've heard it so much, I'm sure that you have to close the door sometimes, but we're talking about trying to sustain things where when we add something to the budget, we're looking at, is this something we're going to be able to maintain 2 or 3 years down the road? When we're dealing with contracts now, we try to look at things that we know will cost us more 5 or 6 or 7 years down the road, and we afford them. Because when you're talking about contracts, you're talking about, first of all, you're talking about people.
Yeah.
But the benefits are the things that 20 years ago were a small piece of the pie. You didn't worry about that. You know, I was talking to somebody, and when I started working 50 years ago, you know, insurance wasn't a factor. You didn't worry about it. You could pay for your insurance out of your pocket change. You know, companies were always paying 100% in those days. But today, it's a huge cost. So sustainability, getting back to your point, is really a key topic. And you're right. We're trying to make sure that when we look at something now, we understand that it's going to cost us something down the road. And I think that was something that wasn't really considered.
Like 10 years ago.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. We used to do things because they were good for today and didn't worry about what it was going to do to, you know, the city trying to maintain it 5 or 6 years from now. And it is a big factor now. You're right.
I see it. Because everything I hear, and when you have a public meeting, and I hear people asking questions about why are you doing this now? Do you think Biddeford, the community, do you think they have a little bit of fear of change?
I think that's natural. I think we all do. And I think in some cases people are looking at something that they think is working well now. Why are you looking to tinker with it? And I think first of all, we look at the technology that all of our departments have. That's driving some change. And the other thing is, with all of these costs, all of the department heads, everybody in the city is trying to provide at least the same level of service for less money. Because everything goes up. I mean, we live in a house, you know, electricity is going up every year, the cost of heating is going up every year, food goes up every year. The same thing happens to the city, you know, and that's a key point. And you're right. So some of the changes are meant to try to continue to provide that service without increasing the cost. The other thing is, I think, and you and I talked about it a little bit before, but is the communication piece. And we don't do a good job, and I don't know how you would do a good job now getting the message out to people. You know, we have public access. We used to rely on the newspaper a lot, and now that's gone away. You know, social media, there are some people that are involved in that. There are a lot of people that aren't. You know, we've got a huge population shift in the city, too. We're now the youngest population in the state. Those folks get their information a much different way than I
Yeah.
do. You know, some of those people have never held a paper. You know, that's
Right.
not how they get their news.
No.
They're better informed probably than I am, but they don't look at the newspaper.
No, they go online.
Exactly, exactly. So that's one of the real challenges we have, because I think when I talk to people one-on-one, they do understand it, and they don't always agree, but they understand that there is a reason why you're doing it, and I think that's part of the problem too, is if they think you're just changing to change, they don't understand the thought behind it, or like you said before, we're trying to do something that'll be here for 10 years.
Exactly.
We'll be able to do it for 10 years and not just be a one-hit wonder.
Right.
They do understand. They do understand it, but it's just, how do we get the message out?
And I also think on social media, you know, when things come out, some of it is not accurate.
Yeah.
I mean, you could wake up in the morning and be in a bad mood and you read it and it's negative, but then the next morning, oh, okay. It also depends on how you interpret it at the moment.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to circle back to our taxes, which you broke it down great. So just to reiterate that our taxes come from the state. They deem what taxes are going to be on property, correct?
Well, just the property value.
Property value.
We control what the taxes are.
Okay.
I wish I could blame that totally on the state, but
You can't.
that wouldn't be fair.
And our taxes are also paying for school
Yeah.
and many other things. So it's not like the taxes are going to City Hall and just sitting there. They are funding other departments.
They fund everything.
There
You
you
look
go.
at police, fire, public works, you know, the school, those are the
Yeah.
big ones. But plowing, I mean, everything that public works does. And one of the things that I think a lot of people do understand but forget sometimes is, you know, you look around and you drive around in the wintertime. Our streets, although the roads are in tough shape and that's being worked on at a much better rate than it had been, but are plowed as well as anybody's. You go to the communities around us and our roads are down to bare pavement, and you know the other communities still have ruts. We have a transportation department, mechanics that work on our equipment that are as good as anybody, and I truly mean that, as good as anybody. We do things in our public works mechanics facility that no other communities do. I talk about it a lot, and this was one of the first examples I saw of how progressive and effective they are. We had years ago brought in a new fire truck. I think it was the first new ladder truck we had.
Yeah.
There was a mechanical problem. Communities typically send that back to the manufacturer or whoever to do the work on it. Our people, it was Carl Marcotte who's in charge of that, brought somebody from the company to do the repair, but his guys and he were there with them, learning what to do in case this happens again. This was the first time that they had ever dealt with this kind of vehicle.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if it cost us any more to bring the guy there, but what it did do was train all of our guys on how to work on this type of equipment. To me, that was taking an extra step that wouldn't necessarily have been taken by a lot of people, and nobody would have criticized them for sending it somewhere to be repaired. But it got repaired in a much quicker way because, you know, you send it away and out of sight, out of mind, it's on their timetable.
Right.
This was done quickly and effectively, and the next time we have an issue, we don't have to bring anybody up. We don't have to send our equipment out. We've got guys that know how to do it because they worked on it with somebody that was expert at it. I mean, that's the kind of thinking that we have in our departments. Our fire department, EMTs particularly, are as good as anybody in the state. Our numbers, and they have a great relationship with the hospital. And they have, one of the doctors is the medical advisor there. The numbers for us reviving people when they get to them in a
Yeah.
certain time are just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. This is, the kind of things that you hope to see in a small community.
And we have it.
And the police department, you think about it, this is a pretty good size city.
Yeah.
We have 5 people on the road at any one time. We're providing, I think, big city services without having those extra big city costs. Our people are doing things far and above what I think a lot of other communities do, and even bigger communities, because they have a lot more people. That's the real challenge, is to be able to support that, so that as we continue to grow and increase, that staff increases. That's the challenge we have right now. Fire department is a perfect example of staff that, when you look at the numbers that they do in a week, in a month, in a year, our numbers are considerably higher than any other community our size. We have a lot of things where people come in during the day. UNE there's a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
The hospital brings a lot of people in. There are a lot of businesses in town that bring a lot of people in, and that increases the calls. And the fire department does a tremendous job of providing effective service. And the challenge we have in the city council now is to be able to financially support that. And you talk about, when we bring a fireman in, it's about $100,000.
Yeah,
When you
yeah.
talk about the training, you talk about, and we're not, it's not all salary.
No.
Benefits and equipment and those things. And so that's the challenge, is how do we do it, and how do we do it so that we can sustain it for 2 or 3 years and not bring people in and then 2 years later, start having layoffs. That's the challenge. And all of that competes for that property tax money.
Yeah.
All of those things providing vital services, needed services, they're all competing for the same dollar. And that's the challenge, is how do we divvy up that pie effectively, fairly, and to the areas that need it the most.
As I listen to how everything kind of melts together, you have a camaraderie within the city, within the fire department, the police department. It's a group of community who care, and they try. This story about the fire truck, to learn that so in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's great.
Yeah, and it always interests me. You're right. And the people that work in these departments, it seems like they're spending money like it was their money, meaning they're really watching out for what they spend.
Yeah.
It amazes me, we get things that come to City Council or Finance Committee, the prices of things today. It's just unbelievable, when you have to buy a piece of equipment, and it's $100,000, and it just puts me back in my chair. But you see, they've gone out to bids, and you talk to these guys, and that's what the prices are. We're affected by so many things, the tariffs and the price of steel, the price of oil, all of those things affect us down at the very bottom level, because that's what's used to make this equipment. But they do work so well, like you said, together, and are so concerned about the tax dollars. A lot of these folks live in the city. They pay the taxes that we pay too.
Yeah.
So, they understand the challenges, but I've never gotten the feeling in the city that any of our departments think that the equipment is what does the job. They understand it's the people that do the job. They try to provide the most effective equipment, but they understand that it's not that piece of equipment that's doing the job. It's not the brand new plow truck that's plowing at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's the guy in the driver's seat. And that's, one of the things that they really get a sense of from the department heads, is they understand that. And they do work together, you're right. That's, you see especially
it.
out when there's something going on.
Oh, yeah.
We've had major storms, and so the guys doing a plow truck can only drive for a certain amount of time. Well, so they end up going to the fire department. The fire department are providing meals for these guys,
Oh my.
not
Yeah.
guys and gals, and places for them to sleep. You know, it's not something that they do in every community.
No, they don't.
It's something that they do here.
Exactly. One of the gentlemen from Public Works in my little room as I'm taping, when you call him up for information, he's got it. I can't remember his name. But he's got the information you're asking. If he doesn't have it, he'll say, I don't have that with me right now. I'm always blown away by him when he gets up and talks.
Yeah. I think Carl Marcotte, I think, is who it is.
Yeah.
And just a little story about him. I was on a school committee. 1999 was the first time I'd ever served on any committee, and we were talking about buying a bus. And I looked at it and, gee, this bus isn't that old. Why are we spending that kind of money? They said, well, go see Carl because he can walk you through it. Go to see him, and he's got a list for every piece of equipment in the city, from a weed whacker to the most expensive fire truck we have. From the time we got it, how much it's cost us, how much it's cost us each year, and the reason we're spending money on this particular bus instead of maybe one that's older is because of the mileage it's got on it and what it's cost us each of the last 2 years in maintenance. So he's got a reason for bringing this thing forward instead of, you know, well, it's 10 years old, so we've got to replace it. That's not how he does things.
No.
That's not how he does things, and you're right. He's got information on every piece of equipment we own. It used to be, I don't know if you remember, but Councilor Swanton used to tease him all the time because, you know, he said, you know, you ought to have some of our equipment a little bit rustier because it would look like it needs to be replaced.
Yeah.
And Carl takes care of that stuff like it was his.
Yeah.
And he has pride in the equipment that he works on in the city and wants to make sure that it may not be the newest, but it doesn't look old.
Right.
You know, it's well taken care of, and that's why I say the stuff that we have in the city, we get the most out of. There's not equipment that we're trading in that's got a long shelf life. I mean,
Yeah.
When they come to us with stuff that needs to be replaced,
It really
needs to be replaced.
It really needs to be replaced.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
So let's talk about housing a little bit. That comes up at the meetings quite a bit.
Especially now.
Yeah.
Because we're, you know, in the last 5 years, we've seen a huge change in the city, in the demographic, in where people are moving into in the downtown. And it does a couple of things. And one of them, and truthfully, I never really thought about until just recently. But with everybody moving into town, it just puts so much pressure on the apartments we have.
Yeah.
Landlords are investing money into their properties, upgrading them, because they know that they can get more money for rents.
Right.
And so some of the people that we've had that have lived here forever are being really pressured either to come up with significantly more rent money or can't afford it anymore. That's a challenge we have now. I think in the really immediate future is how to provide affordable housing.
Yeah.
I'm on the Biddeford Housing Authority. I've been on that committee for about 8 years now. Guy Gagnon, who's the president of the Biddeford Housing Authority, does a great job in scouting properties. We've opened several properties in the city that are new, but it's not able to keep up right now. I mean,
Really?
there are so many folks coming in, and like I said, you know, they talk about Biddeford as the youngest city in the state, which, I mean, you know, 10 years ago, that was the furthest from the truth.
Right.
And, you know, even what's, and you talked about it a little bit before, nothing happens. We talk about something, but that doesn't mean it's ready tomorrow. We talk about you know, a development coming in, and it's 3 years before it's here.
Right.
You know, so people are moving in, and they are putting pressure on the older apartment buildings, and the rents are going up, and we've got, I think, two forms of homelessness now in the city. One is the the chronic homeless, the people
Yeah.
that have either substance abuse issues or mental health challenges and have been homeless. We've also got that group which is being forced out of their apartments. We've heard of, landlords that are, people are being asked to leave their apartments for them to be renovated. When they get renovated, they're so expensive that the people that were in them can't afford
Yeah.
them anymore. I think that the community has done a pretty good job of protecting seniors. There is a lot of senior housing available in the city.
Yeah.
With the MacArthur homes and those type of projects, but family housing is a difficult thing, and we're starting to work on it. There's a homeless group that I'm part of that Reverend Shirley
Yeah. I've had her on the
heads.
show, yeah.
And but it's something that takes time, and I have a tough time trying to understand how we do it, because to me, if you're a landlord or a property owner, you
Yeah.
have a right to put improvements into your property, and then you've made the investment, you should be able to, I don't know if get what you can is the right term, but you should be able to rent it for what
Yeah.
is a fair rate,
Fair rate.
and that's for you to determine, not for the city.
Yeah.
That's the problem I have. We're not New York City where we can put rent control in and things like that, and all of those things have ramifications. I've seen that some people have talked about, well, the city can give land to Bedford Housing. Bedford Housing can put up property for free, and with state grants and things like that, and some of that is true, but the city and Guy Gagnon from Bedford Housing have looked at the properties that are available in the city. Most of what we own is not developable property. It's a piece of land that's on the corner of
Okay.
the street. In the old days, probably had an apartment building on it, but that's not allowed anymore. You just can't
Can't put a building just
kind
anywhere.
of buildings that,
Yeah.
and our zoning doesn't allow all of that. So there is not as much developable property, that's a tough word, as you would think. The other thing is where we put housing is important too. And I mean, one of the few pieces of property that I know of that we do own is the 3 Lincoln Street property.
Yeah.
I think that's necessarily appropriate to take off the tax rolls
Yeah.
and make it an affordable housing property. One of the only disadvantage, and one of the things that Guy Gagnon has addressed a little bit as the head of the Bedford Housing Authority, is that the properties the properties the Bedford Housing Authority owned are tax exempt, so they don't have to pay property taxes. Right. He has voluntarily come up with a plan to work with the city where he will pay 2% of the gross revenues received from that property. So basically the rents, and he pays 2%. The thing is that, in Bedford Housing Authority, all of the St. Andre's property, the school, the rectory, and the convent are all Bedford Housing Authority projects. The old convent, I think the taxes would be in the area, if it was taxable based on its assessed value, about $4,000. Because we're paying the 2% on rent, it's $400 that the city, that Bedford Housing is paid, significantly less.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a drawback there, but so the long answer to your question is, I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know how to solve it. It's something that we have to work on, and we have been working on. And I think one of the pluses with working with Reverend Shirley is she's got access to people that have dealt with this issue.
Yeah.
And this was one of those things, at least for me, that all of a sudden appeared. I know it's been happening for a while, but we didn't realize that it was an issue until we understood particularly how many kids we have in the school that are classified as homeless.
I was just going to bring that up.
That's the thing that really slapped you in the face.
Oh, it
And
did.
when you have, one of the stories was there was a young mother who had a job. I mean, it wasn't a person that, hasn't taken any responsibility for herself. She had a job, but the property that she was living in was sold. People, everybody that was in there left, and they redeveloped it and improved it, and the rent was double, and she couldn't afford it. She got 2 young children, and through no fault of her own, and that's why I say that's a different kind of homeless than what
Yeah.
we're used to.
Right.
And that's the challenge right now. Even general assistance, I mean, they have an ability to help you pay for rent if you can't pay for your rent.
Right.
They have no ability to find you a rent. And that's the other challenge. There aren't apartments available in Biddeford. They just are not there.
Yeah.
The stock is down when you have so many people coming in. Not a lot of increase now with the Harrington project and the Riverview project coming up. There'll be more apartments available, but
But that's not low income.
no. But any apartment would be helpful at this point because people are taking apartments they wouldn't necessarily take because that's all that's available. I mean, I worked with the Mainway, which is a volunteer agency in the city. Volunteered with that for about 10 years.
Yeah.
And they have a transitional home. They also ran a representative payee program, which is a lot of the folks with mental challenges or substance abuse just can't handle their finances. And most of them are on Social Security, either disability or SSI. So we would help them manage it. And so those are folks that, for the most part are getting $700 to $800 a month, and trying to manage rents and stuff like that is that was the challenge. That was the challenge. And what we were finding is 10 years ago, you could find an apartment for anybody that wanted an apartment. Some of them weren't the best, but they were
But now
stable
we have
housing.
more volume.
Right, and nothing to fill it. We don't have the spaces available for people. It's like Portland, where we had worked with some people in Portland, whether you have a voucher or not, that helps you pay for your rent. If you can't find a place, it doesn't help you very much. So to me, that's the biggest challenge we've got in the next 5 years, is to address that. How do we go about it? That's the problem. I don't know who the expert is in this.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem, because about the story you just told with the mother with the 2 children.
Yeah.
What are her options? I mean, the kids are probably at friends' houses, sleeping on the sofa. That's a tough nut to crack.
And the only other option is, the temporary hotel places.
Yeah.
And that's, it's off the street and it's safe, but not a place to raise children.
Right.
That's the thing. And I mean, one of the things that's happening is that some of the kids, we have kids that are in the Biddeford school system that truly are homeless, but are living in other communities, because that's where they were able to find temporary housing.
Yeah.
Trying to at least not uproot them from the school, try to give them some stability. But that's the toughest thing we have to deal with.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's not something that the city, any city, has total control over. We don't own a bunch of property. We don't own a bunch of buildings that are there waiting for people that are in need. And the other thing is we have this, and it really affected the schools, but it affects this too. The school department now has about over 220 kids that speak different languages.
Yeah.
We've got 9% of our school population that speaks different languages. I'm at City Hall quite often and at the General Assistance Office quite often, and there are still people coming, and not the influx of people that Portland saw, not the asylum seekers necessarily, but people that are here legitimately coming to Biddeford, looking for places to live, and because they have family or something here. Large families, and it's just difficult, and that's probably the biggest challenge, is finding apartments that can take care of a family, 2, 3, 4 bedroom apartments. That's what's missing. That's what's missing, because the money is in the 1 and 2 bedroom apartments.
Right. Exactly. Well, now, Let's talk a little bit about parking.
Favorite
That's,
subject.
oh boy.
The issue is, I think, and again, I take responsibility for some of this, we haven't communicated very well what really we're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's,
The parking garage that's being proposed now, that's being planned now on 3 Lincoln Street, is not to benefit the stores downtown or to benefit the restaurants downtown. Most people are not going to walk from that parking garage over to Grady's to shop for a TV. It's going to, in my mind, we own that property at 3 Lincoln Street. This is to help us develop that property to the biggest extent. We have already significant interest in people wanting to develop that property, but they can't bring any business down or any companies down that have employees without a place to park.
Right.
We have on the old Merck site now, there's pavement down there, and there are people from the apartments at Saco Falls and the lofts at Saco Falls that lease spaces. So what we have available for parking is already taken up. It's used, it's gone.
it's gone.
You can't bring anybody in without providing parking.
No.
Because the same thing is true. People keep saying they're not going to walk from the parking garage here to downtown. They're not going to walk, they're not going to park downtown on Washington Street and walk over there to a business office. There needs to be parking there, and that's why I support that parking garage there. We need to, and we've started to address the parking downtown because it is an issue. We've got developments, smaller developments coming in. There's a building on Washington Street right across in the Wonder Bar that's transforming into condos or apartments. According to the zoning, they should have 29 parking spaces
Yeah.
because of the number of apartments. But we didn't require them to have any parking spaces. They were given a waiver. I don't know where they're going to park.
Yeah.
I don't know where they're going to park, and I don't know why it's on the city to provide parking for residential places downtown. The city doesn't come and plow my driveway.
No.
They don't come and plow your driveway. If they do, we're going to have an investigation. But you know, everybody is responsible for their own parking. And it's been forever, and this is one of the things you talked about before, change, that, you know, that parking was available to anybody who wanted to park there, whether you were, you know, you live downtown or not. Well, there are more and more and more people living downtown. At the same time, there are more and more businesses coming downtown, and they just, there needs to be a better handle on what we have for parking and how best to share that parking. I think long after, you know, I'm involved, but I think there's going to have to be a look at some kind of a facility downtown for parking. As you look at the parking now, and there are times when you can go by and you can find a space, but there are a lot of times when you can't find a space. There are a lot of employees that work downtown. We know that they're still doing the 4 hours and then moving, you know, 20 feet and moving another 4 hours. But when you bring employees in, when you bring in people that live downtown, everybody needs a place to park. And A, it's difficult to find that place, and B, how to, you know, who should be providing it? Should be the people that, I mean, you know, there are landlords that build elsewhere that are required to provide parking. If you build out on May Street, you have an apartment building, you have to supply a certain amount of parking. You live downtown, you have a building downtown, that's not necessarily required.
No.
We've done things to, you know, ask the planning board not to do any waivers now, but they look at specific projects. So it's not, it's easy for me to say we shouldn't give any waivers. They're looking at a specific project and weighing that project, and that may be a little bit different, but I think that's the other challenge. So I fully understand that parking garage on 3 Lincoln Street isn't going to help all the businesses downtown, other than the fact that it may alleviate some of the parking that's there for businesses, and folks may park in that lot, particularly employees, and alleviate some of the downtown parking. But this is truly, truly to help develop that property.
Yeah, and see, I when I think about it, downtown, if you have an apartment, the city is not, you know, in charge of where you need to park.
Right.
I mean, and of course, I'm comparing this to like Manhattan, alternate sides of the street parking. You know, you go out there at 11 o'clock with your lunch, you move, you go back, whatever. That was my choice where I park, or do I want to go into a lot and walk 5 blocks?
Right.
It was my choice.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, you know, I mean, my son lives in Boston.
Yeah.
He lives in the South End, and, you know, they have stickers,
Yeah.
which doesn't guarantee you a space.
No.
It just says if you park there, you won't get towed.
Right.
So, I mean, those are things that I've thought about a lot, and I think one of the concerns we had is that employees parking downtown would start to push a little bit further into the residential neighborhoods, and then the residents wouldn't have places to park. And we haven't dealt with that yet, but I think that's a challenge that's going to go forward. But you're right, we've looked at that separately from the rest of the city. We've looked at residential parking there as differently from the rest of the city, and that's, I think, why we're having a lot of the problems we're having now, because it's never been something they've had to think about.
Right.
And now they do.
That's it right there.
Yeah.
That is what it is. Because I can go downtown, I find parking on the main street. Nothing has changed there.
Right.
It's the parking lots
Yeah. Yeah.
have changed.
Yeah.
And every city, whether wherever they are, they charge for parking. It's a given.
Yeah.
So as I listen to the people, and I surely understand the shop owners, the employees, fixed income, I understand that. But I think you're in charge of your parking.
Yeah. And again, I mean, we talked about this earlier on, but trying to come up with something that's sustainable. City can't afford to provide all of that, especially the parking lots. You know, the city takes care of all the snow removal.
Right.
The city takes care of, finally, took care of all the paving in the lots on Jefferson Street. You know, those lots are in great shape. And one of the things we did is there's a change to Franklin Street where from Main to Jefferson, I think it's two-way instead of one-way. And it ended up providing a significant amount of on-street parking on Franklin Street. So those businesses that are adjacent to that ended up having more parking available to them because the on-street parking. There have been, I think, changes for the positive. I think, again, part of it is the communication piece, where things happened, not everybody was aware of what the changes were going to be. Some of it was confusion. Look,
miscommunication. Too,
exactly. We had been doing this for 2 weeks, and I went down to Time and Tide to have coffee, and I came out and I had a ticket on my car because I parked in a spot. I looked up, and there's a sign that said loading zone only. Well, I don't know who I was going to blame. I mean, you know, I wasn't smart enough to look at the sign. I just thinking this is Bedford. You can park wherever you want. Then, I mean, I think it's improving. I really do think it's improving. I know there are people that are still upset about it and upset about the change, but I think the way it's been administered is better than it was.
I do too.
We're still improving, but I really think what we're seeing now, and we're going to continue to see, is the fact that we need more space downtown. Yeah,
exactly. Well, we're getting short on time, Mike, but there's one more question I want to talk about with you. The pilot. You know, the payment in lieu of taxes. Explain that, because I hear a lot about this at the planning board meeting.
Yeah.
Would you explain that to us?
Yeah. Payment in lieu of taxes is when the city has an agreement with a nonprofit, the hospital, UNE. We talked about Bedford Housing. Bedford Housing is entered into a pilot agreement, really paying 2% of the gross rents that they receive. UNE and the hospital are the two big ones. About 5 or 6 years ago, the mayor had a group of counselors take a look at this. And based on, there was a lot of talk about cities like Boston, bigger cities, and how they were doing, because Boston has a huge amount of hospitals and colleges. And so they were able to come up with some kind of an agreement with those entities. But what they did was they looked at not only what they provided them in payments, but what they do for the city. What kind of contributions do they make that aren't necessarily cash contributions? What do they provide for the residents of Boston? What do they do, for the whole community? What, do they do clinics? That kind of outreach stuff. So we took a look at that, trying to incorporate that, because that is a cost to them. What do their employees do that benefit the city? And so we're doing that and trying to be fair with those. And we talk about UNE and the hospital because they're the two biggest.
Right.
They're the two biggest. And UNE does have an agreement with the city to pay $50,000 a year. When you look at the amount of property that they have and where it is and the value of that property, it's not anywhere near what they would have to pay for taxes, but it's an agreement that they've made that they didn't have to make.
Okay.
So anyway, getting back to that committee, we didn't come up with a plan of how to solve it because we, at that time, and I think it's changed now, I think the leadership at UNE is more responsive to the city and at least talking to the city. So that may be something that we can bring up then, but bring up again, but it wasn't something that was really available to us at the time. They have no responsibility to do this. They don't have to sit with us. They are legally allowed to, it's a tax exempt property.
Yeah.
So anything that's related to the college, they don't have to pay taxes on. The fact that they made this agreement and even though I think the term of the agreement is expired, they continue to pay the $50,000 a year, is something that they don't have to do. I think that they should be at least willing to discuss with us, looking at it again, but it's not a requirement, and that's the important thing. There's nothing the city can do to say to UNE, you will pay this amount.
Because they don't have to.
Exactly, and there, you look at most communities, they don't pay anything. I think what we really need to do is to do what we tried to do in that group, is to identify all of the things that UNE and the hospital do that they're not required to do either. UNE has a lot of interaction with the school department, which would cost money if you had to bring in somebody to do these kind of things. They do a lot of stuff with environmental things. I know each year they used to do something with the solid waste committee and the schools to try to help the kids understand environment, particularly around recycling and other issues. So, but to help us understand all of the impacts that they have and to include that as part of a pilot.
Right.
But until we have an agreement to sit down, there's nothing that the city can do. Nothing that the city can do. I know that Governor LePage had tried to put something, is that for you, in effect, but it didn't go through. So.
Well, I wish we had more time, Mike. We've covered a lot.
Yeah.
We really have, and we're out of time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this. I appreciate the fact that you're willing to do it, and it's very helpful. So.
Well, this is my way, my contribution to the city. I've learned a lot at City Hall. I enjoy watching and listening to everyone. I really do like it.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot to learn, that's for sure. I've learned a
there
lot
is.
since I've been on the council. So.
Yeah.
Good.
So I want to thank you for being on the show. I hope you come back again. Whatever we need to cover topics, it'd be great.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And I want to thank everybody for watching the show today. I'm a little clearer on everything in the city, thanks to Mike. And I hope you are too. So we'll be talking to you next week. Have a good weekend and see you later.